Bonelab, the sequel to Boneworks. This game has finally launched, and it seems like so many people were hyped for it, but was it worth the wait? How does it hold up compared to its predecessor, Boneworks? And more importantly, does the Quest 2 version bring the main version down, or is it an amazing equivalence? Well, in this video, we are going to take a look at a couple of things and do a critical analysis on Bonelab. Was it worth the wait? Did the hype bring it up too far only to fall down so catastrophically? Perhaps, perhaps not. But let's have a critical analysis of Bonelab. Before we jump into a ton of detail about Bonelab, I have to bring something up, and that, of course, is Boneworks. If you haven't played Boneworks, Bonelab is going to feel like this amazing brand new game that's pushing the envelope. Hell, I mean, I saw tons of YouTube videos this past week, month, talking about how Bonelab will change VR forever. But did it? Honestly, it's not really doing too much different that Boneworks was doing, albeit it does have this cool new avatar switching, which is awesome. But I do have to get this part off my chest. If you played Boneworks and were a part of the Boneworks modding scene, then you might have seen all of this already. Honestly, in Boneworks, you could just go and download pretty much whatever avatar you want. Well, not really. There's not a ton of avatars, but they are there. You can make one yourself or get one of your modder friends to make one for you. Before I go off the rails, this is my main point. The mods that were in Boneworks kind of makes Bonelab not feel as relevant. Yes, there definitely are certain new mechanics like on-the-fly avatar, custom switching, and it maps to the body, which is awesome. And we have things like go-karts, and that is pretty cool. But we can't ignore the major elephant in the room, and that is reused assets from Boneworks. I saw the term "more of the same" kept popping up in my chat. And in those moments while playing, all the way up to, I believe, chapter 6, I mean, I didn't really experience anything that was different or new from Boneworks. Same enemies, same enemy types, same animations. It does seem like the team focused on creating somewhat of a story and a lot of other assets like level design for us to kind of play through and different puzzles. But to say that Bonelab is completely changing VR and we will never be the same, it's just not true. I'm sorry, it's just not true. It's a decent VR game, 100%. I was having a good time, and if you're thinking, is Bonelab worth it? Well, that is up to you. If you've played Boneworks before and you love the mods and you're a part of it, Bonelab is not going to feel new to you. I'm sorry. It's just, I'm going to put that out there. And if you haven't played Boneworks before and Bonelab is your first excursion, then it's going to be completely awesome. Everything is brand new to you and there's no reason not to get it. But in my first 3 hours of playing, the only thing new I saw were the locations that you would visit in the campaign. And also within that time of my 3-hour playthrough, I'm pretty sure every single item I interacted with was from Boneworks. The same assets, weapons, items, you name it. The other thing I want to talk about is the physics. And I kept referring to them as physics, and there was definitely moments where I was getting frustrated. It seemed like I was clipping through random objects, and the climbing, well, even in Boneworks, I wasn't a fan of climbing. Now, this just might be my own personal preference, especially coming from games like Blade and Sorcery, but the climbing in Boneworks never, and also Bonelab, never feels satisfying. I think it comes from the fact that Bonelab and Boneworks wants to be a full physics simulation, but 90% of the users are just controlling the character with the touch controllers and headset. Not a lot of people have full body tracking. So what that translates into is us as the user trying to use our hands to control an avatar's full body. That's why climbing feels strange because the character's legs just dangle there and they don't try to get on things. The other part that's on my mind in a major way are the visuals of the game, especially compared to Boneworks. When I went into the sandbox mode of Bonelab and spawned in a Ford, I was taken back because he 1000% looks not as good, but there were some other changes that I did appreciate, like the character's hair. In Boneworks, you could pretty much see through hair. It's like a weird two-sided alpha. Bonelab didn't seem to have that problem, but they definitely took away some detail, some texture, something from the characters and everything around it, probably for performance. But in a brand new game that released at the tail end of 2022, yeah, I want performance, but I want you to push the envelope also. I think empirically, Boneworks just looks better. And maybe that's because it didn't have to worry about its Quest equivalent. We definitely saw the comparison videos and pictures of the stills between the Bonelab PC version and the Quest version, but we didn't see a detailed, comparison between Boneworks and Bonelab. And I now that it's released, I can definitely tell. A huge other piece that I have to cover is mods. When I watched the Bonelab trailer, and I remember reading hype and going into the developer Discord, they were all about mods, which is awesome, and it excited me to no extent, because when you look at Boneworks, especially when the game first came out, the devs didn't even want mods in there in the first place. It was brute force to be put in there, and even when it was kind of accepted, the developer had like a little tag that they put in there if you had a mod installed that said this is not I don't want to say a licensed copy, but it would essentially say that this is not representative of the real game. It would tell you that mods are installed, which is kind of like, ugh. And today when I played Bonelab, I went to the mod section. I mean, in the hub, for God's sake, there's a mod section, and you go there and there are no mods available. And I looked on Google and through Discords, and I did not see anywhere to get mods. And the more that I looked through the different Discords, they were talking about how they weren't going to release the SDK until people beat the game or something, which I don't want to say it, but I feel like I remember them in the trailers and just talking about how the game is like, there's going to be mods and it's going to be awesome. But the fact that you're holding back the mods again because you want people to just go through your campaign, I don't know. That's, to me, just doesn't feel right. But all that aside, the thing that does excite me about Bonelab are the mods, to see what's possible. The most fun I've had in Bonelab is solely from being in sandbox mode and see what I can do, the funny stuff I can make, the cringe things I can make. That's why I love Boneworks, and that's what excites me about Bonelab, the natural mod support to see what people made. I mean, honestly, before the launch of Bonelab, crazy people in the Boneworks modding community already released the go-kart. They released a 4-door sedan. There was a skeleton from Bonelab, the torch from Bonelab. It's all in there. The last thing I want to cover is kind of the gameplay. I touched on it in a little bit, but the word that comes to my mind is conveyance. Conveyance to me feels like when a player is playing the game and they don't naturally know what to do and they get stuck and it's not a puzzle. Like in the beginning of the game, when you essentially get to chapter 2, you reach the hub, also known as the lab. But within this lab is a roadblock that gatekeeps you from progressing in the main story until you, I guess, quote unquote, figure out what to do. And it is and isn't complicated. Like, once you figure out what to do, you're gonna feel like a moron for not, well, doing it sooner. I mean, I did it live and I had people screaming at me and it did not feel good. And Boneworks also had this problem. The campaign was like half boring and then ramped up. And I was hoping that with Bonelab, it was going to be like awesome all the way through for its campaign. But it starts slow and stays slow up until around chapter 6, and then it feels a little bit better. So what's my point here? What am I trying to say? Don't buy Bonelab? No, I honestly don't think I'm trying to say that, because while I was playing the game, after a few hours and getting to a certain spot, I was having fun. There's awesome things you can do in it. There's certain challenges and puzzles that feel cool. The aesthetics of the game are awesome. The look and feel is great. The music is... I turned off the music. There was one point I got into the hub and someone was singing and that had to go. But the ambiance is cool. What I am trying to say is that this game, much like a lot of games out there, may have suffered from the hype train. Is it the game's fault? Were they the ones creating the hype train? Perhaps, perhaps not, but it kind of is what it is. Bonelab is a fun VR game and experience. It's going to have mods, it's going to have patches to bring it to its ultimate potential. Is it the sequel to Boneworks that everyone wanted and expected? I don't see how someone can honestly say that yes it is, because it has so many reused assets and reused framework from Boneworks. I mean, hell, all the animations were the same, even on some of the people that you find, not just nobodies, people. To me, this honestly just feels like they wanted to get Boneworks out to the Quest, but knew that they would get chastised for doing so. So they created a new game called Bonelab, and they used a lot of the same assets to get it where it was, so it could run on the Quest. It does not push any envelopes. This will not change VR forever. It is a fun VR experience, and I'm excited to see where it goes, but VR, unfortunately, will stay the same.